In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, August 17th. Marking his first 100 days in office, President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged to revisit the past period and pursue people-centered, future-oriented policies. Health authorities here in South Korea have reported over 180,000 new COVID-19 infections on this Wednesday, the highest in 4 months. And US President Joe Biden sets in stone a signature piece of legislation on climate change, healthcare and corporate tax just weeks before the midterm elections. President Yoon Suk-yeol hosted his first official press conference earlier on this Wednesday morning to mark his first 100 days in office. For details on that event, I have our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min standing by live on the line. Jung-min, do fill us in.
Hey there, Sunny. So a number of topics discussed during the 15-minute-long press conference. But first, the president stressed his commitment to the Korean people amid his unusually low job ratings. Listen in.
국정을 운영하는 데 있어 가장 중요한 것은 첫째도 국민의 뜻이고 둘째도 국민의 뜻입니다. 국민의 숨소리 하나 놓치지 않고 한치도 국민의 뜻에 벗어나지 않도록 그 뜻을 잘 받들겠습니다. 저부터 앞으로 더욱 분골쇄신하겠습니다.
Regarding his administration's audacious initiative for North Korean denuclearization unveiled during his Liberation Day speech earlier this week, President Yoon acknowledged the need for dialogue and added he does not seek a regime change by power in North Korea. Yoon's audacious initiative includes a number of measures aimed at improving North Korean people's livelihoods in stages in exchange for North Korea's practical steps towards denuclearization. He said he's also willing to help restore Washington-Pyongyang relationship if the North Korean regime abandons its nuclear development program. When it comes to bilateral ties with Japan, the South Korean leader reiterated his strong will to swiftly improve the relations, saying the authorities are looking into ways to compensate Korean victims of Japan's use of wartime forced labor while avoiding Japan's sovereignty issues as claimed by the Japanese government. That's all from me at the soar, and I will bring more updates later on. Sunny.
All right, Jung-min, thank you very much for that coverage. Up next in the second installment of our two-part series on President Yoon Suk-yeol's 100-day in office, we walk back in time to the day of his inauguration and the events that followed over the past 100 days. My colleague Moon Gon-young reports.
대통령으로서의 직책을 성실히 수행할 것을 국민 앞에 엄숙히 선서합니다.
100 days ago, this country saw its first prosecutor general turned politician take the oath of office for presidency. A political novice who had won a close election by a margin of less than 1%, the narrowest margin ever.
저는 자유, 인권, 공정, 연대의 가치를 기반으로 국민이 진정한 주인인 나라, 국제사회에서 책임을 다하고 존경받는 나라를 위대한 국민 여러분과 함께 반드시 만들어 나가겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Change. Roughly 100 days ago, South Koreans ushered in Yoon Suk-yeol as their new president with the conviction that he's the one who can and will bring about the much-needed changes to the nation, the society, their daily lives. 100 days later, it may not be so life-changing, but there are some changes being seen in different parts of the society. For instance, up until 3 months ago, this part of the presidential Blue House had been off-limits to the public for decades. Now, it's open for anyone to enjoy, as Mr. Yoon made good on his campaign pledge that he'd return this beautiful space, embracing every bit of Korea's modern history, back to the people.
This as the newly elected Yoon Suk-yeol kicked off his presidency at the relocated presidential office in a former defense ministry complex in Seoul's Yongsan district.
일단 청와대 경내로 들어가면 제왕적 권력의 상징인 청와대를 벗어나는 것이 더욱 어려워질 것이라고 생각합니다. 용산 대통령 집무실의 1층에 프레스 센터를 설치해서 수시로 언론과 소통하는 대통령이 되겠습니다.
Almost every morning before he starts work, South Korea's new president stops to chat with a scrum of journalists camped in the lobby of his presidential office.
2층에도 다 입주했어요? 네. 책상들 다 마련하고 잘 좀 부탁합니다.
Standing in front of a row of flashing cameras, boom microphones, and reporters trying to outshout one another, Yoon offers opinions on a range of issues, both serious and lighthearted.
야당도 새처럼 그동안 있던 지역에서 만남을 제한할 의향이 있습니다.
어려움을 헤쳐나가는데 여야가 따로 있겠습니까? 수고하십시오.
During the first 100 days in office, Yoon has held 38 so-called doorstepping sessions. That compares with Park Geun-hye's 7 press conferences throughout her term, and even a lot more than his predecessor, Moon Jae-in, who entered office pledging excellent communication with the public. Even so, President Yoon has faced a bumpy political honeymoon.
In South Korea, usually the trajectory of public approval is directly relevant to the time that you have remaining in office. And so it means that usually presidents start with a relatively high approval rating, and then usually it declines as the president's time in office diminishes and as he begins to lose power. And so what's a little bit interesting and different about the Yoon presidency is that he has had this early dip.
What began as an approval rating of 52% in his first week in office was down to 24% by the first week of August, or only half of the 48.6% he won in votes during the election. In another poll, he saw a slight bump in the second week of August with a rating of just above 30%.
And there have been a lot of stories out there, in particular about personnel appointments that might not necessarily be fully based on merit, but might be based on connections.
You cannot just simply decide on a policy and announce it the same day. There has to be a lot of work that goes into understanding the public. And if you're going to announce a policy initiative, you should do your own internal polling to figure out where the public stands. You need to work with the National Assembly because it's controlled by the opposition. You need to consider the labor aspect of this.
The other issue, of course, is that there's been a lot of discord within the conservative camp, in particular over the party leadership. And Yoon has been caught a little bit in a bad look in terms of his relationship with his party.
But every cloud has a silver lining.
In foreign policy, I think that Yoon has done well with the United States and has had an acceptable introduction to the international community. And he essentially receives an incomplete on relations with Japan, China, and North Korea. If we look at Yoon's foreign policy priorities, and we look at South Korean public opinion, it actually looks like Yoon is doing a lot of what the South Korean public wants and expects.
And one of the things that he's going to have to do if he wants to start to recover in his approval rates is he's going to have to think carefully about how you go about governing, how you roll out policies, and how you take into account public reaction to those policies. If he can do that and really start to understand what this job looks like, then I think he can kind of smooth out the rest of the first year and then build into the second and the third year, which is going to be especially important headed into the 2024 National Assembly elections.
And the issues on which I think the South Korean public expects performance the most are in terms of solving a lot of fundamental economic problems related to real estate, related to jobs. And the problem is that those issues that he really needs to deal with most effectively are issues that are being negatively affected by the backdrop of the global economy and in particular rising global inflation.
South Korean presidencies have a tendency of ending in disgrace. Elected in one of the closest races since the restoration of democracy in 1987, The South Korean people handed the prosecutor of nearly 3 decades the presidency in hopes that he will be a president unlike any of his predecessors. That his lack of elected political experience will serve as more of an asset than a liability. Now that was 100 days ago. The first 100 days is just a tiny fraction of a 5-year South Korean presidential term. How this nation will remember him, or history will record Yoon Suk-yeol, the 20th president of the Republic of Korea, will depend on the many more 100 days to come. 문건영, 아리랑 뉴스.
In this next segment, we share with you the thoughts of pundits here and elsewhere with regard to the Yoon administration's first 100 days in office and the related events thus far. I have Dr. Woo Jung-hyuk from the Sejong Institute here in the studio. Dr. Woo, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Dr. Bruce Burnett at Rand Corporation live on the line. Dr. Burnett, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Well, thank you very much.
Dr. Woo, we'll start here then. Let's begin with a few words on your thoughts regarding the president's speech to mark his first 100 days in office. What struck you the most?
So it's his 100th day, which means that it is just a little over than 3 months. That means that it's not about what he has achieved or what he has done during the 100 days. He basically spoke to the public that what he's going to do in the rest of his tenure and what's the direction that he's going to lead this country. So if we recall that what kind of questions raised by media today, those questions are not about his policies. It's mostly about domestic politics or his personal issues in the presidential office or in his cabinet. So I believe that since many people are not raising oppositions with regard to his policy area, especially the foreign policy area, I think there are many rooms for improving his popularity in his term left more than 4 years.
Right, indeed. Dr. Burnett, the Yoon administration's first 100 days in office comes amid low approval ratings. What are your thoughts on this particular reality?
We have to remember that the first 100 days are 6% of the time he's going to be in office. I think most of us wouldn't want to be judged based upon just 6% of a job we do. In this particular case, I think he's had some really important successes. He strengthened the U.S.-South Korea alliance. He has built strong relationships with European countries, and he's recognized the importance of defending South Korea. Sometimes I think we lost that with President Moon, that he was prepared to compromise with whatever North Korea wanted. This is some good results with regard to security. Those security things, I think, are important in building. And in doing that, he has built a close relationship, I think, also with the United States.
Right. And here on the domestic front, Dr. Woo, then, what are some of President Yoon's notable strides on the local front?
So it has been very difficult for him to pursue his own agenda on the domestic fronts because many domestic agenda requires the ratification or approval from the National Assembly, which is taken by opposition yet. So those domestic agendas, including economic reform, labor reform, even for the nuclear power plant issue requires some sort of approvals or ratifications by National Assembly, which you cannot expect from the opposition taken by the opposition party right now. So I think that President Yoon until 2024, it's going to be a very bumpy ride for him to pursue his domestic agenda. But he sent a continuous message to the public that he's going to revert those policies that he believed was wrong for the national interest, which includes that nuclear power plant and tax and labor reforms. So I believe that in 100 states, it's too early to say assess what he has achieved so far. It's more about whether he is in the right direction. And he told the public this time that he's in the right direction and he needs to get some more support from the public.
Right. And on the international front then, Dr. Bennett, as you mentioned, there is much efforts by the Yoon administration to better engage the US and neighboring Japan, of course. What more can you tell us about those efforts?
Well, I think the important part here is there is greater recognition, I think, throughout the region and in the United States, in Europe, and so forth. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese support of that invasion, there are some security challenges that are out there that are really much clearer than they have been in the last 10 or 15 years. With those in mind, the U.S.-South Korea return to military exercises is critical in building our joint security capabilities. No one would take a soccer team and say, we want you to go out and play a championship game, but, oh, by the way, don't practice before the game. You don't need to practice. It's not important. We have to think about security in the same kind of way. Training of military forces is critical to them being capable and ready to deal with challenges. And it is not just if a conflict occurs. It's also if we want to deter conflict, we have to be ready. One of the ancient Roman philosophers said, if you want peace, prepare for war. Now, he doesn't mean to start a war. He meant if you're ready to fight, an opponent is likely not going to want to fight. And that's what I think the progress has been made. And what's important in that is for South Korea, Japan is critical as well. There is no way the U.S. can support Korea in a war without access to Japanese bases and facilities. So a closer relationship among the three countries is also critical, and progress has been made there.
Right. Back on the local front, Doctor, we spoke about room for much improvement under the Yoon administration. Which areas then do you suppose need to be better addressed by the Yoon administration?
I think that Yoon administration needs to fill out the cabinet positions and the necessary government positions pretty soon. We understand that it takes time to pick a right person for the right place, but there are criticisms from the public that it takes much longer time. And one thing that I want to mention is that I don't know whether you could see it this morning. The enthusiasm from the reporters at the press conference was much lower from my perspective, mainly because that they always had a chance to ask questions when President commute his office. So in the previous administrations, that media reporters had a very small chance of asking questions directly to the president. But these days, for 100th day, president took questions every morning. So I think that reporters had less enthusiasm at the press conference today, because they have another chance tomorrow.
Right, daily doorstep.
Yes.
Dr. Bennett, similarly, on the international front then, some say the Yoon administration needs to better balance efforts to bolster security, which you mentioned, with efforts to perhaps boost the economy. Of course, they are talking about commitment to trade ties with neighboring China. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we have to remember that as the U.S. has recognized the Chinese threat, we have to go back in time and say the Cold War that has been developing between China and the United States didn't start a year or 2 or 3 ago. It started decades ago. The Chinese recognized that if they were going to have leverage in their region and against the United States, they needed to build that leverage with economics. As a result, they have substantial leverage with Korea, as they demonstrated in 2017 and 2016 with the THAAD activities. China now is emphasizing the three no's and saying, oh, you've got to go back to that Korea, when China never did what they promised when South Korea talked about the three no's. So one has to be careful with China. China is going to want to put a lot of pressure on Korea to gain more influence. But Korea also has to recognize that it has substantial economic relations with China and has got to be prepared to deal with China in a way that will maintain economic capabilities in Korea.
Right, and that remains a task, of course, for the new administration. Dr. Wu, during an earlier speech on Monday to mark Liberation Day, President Yoon spoke about an ambitious initiative, which he also mentioned today, of course, for North Korea, a development plan for North Korea should it surrender its nuclear ambitions. Now, some critics say the offer falls short of wooing Pyongyang, as it has strong ties with China, which is just as capable of making a similar offer. What are your thoughts on this?
Since the administration used the term audacious approach to DPRK, there are criticisms from some observers that whether it is audacious enough to bring North Korea back to the negotiations. But I think the real question that we need to ask is whether North Korea can be audacious enough. Because it's not about us, it's about DPRK that has developed its nuclear weapons and that has refused to receive any humanitarian assistance for their people who are suffering. So President Yoon laid out his plan on Monday that he's going to provide almost everything if that doesn't hurt the spirits of the sanctions because of North Korea's nuclear development. So I think that if North Korea refused to talk with the international community, it's not because we are not audacious enough. It's because that North Korea needs that kind of international environment to keep its regime surviving. So I believe that President Yoon is going to provide humanitarian assistance no matter what, and he's going to find a way to relieve some sanctions if North Korea takes very meaningful steps to denuclearization. So it's about whether North Korea is going to take that meaningful step or not. It's not about South Korea or international community is going to provide something more.
Right. Dr. Burnett, the Yoon administration is also seeking to expand its ties with its Southeast Asian counterparts, perhaps in sharing the concerns that you mentioned earlier about economic ties with China. What perhaps are the broader implications of stronger ties between South Korea and Southeast Asia?
Southeast Asia is a vibrant marketplace for Korea. It's an opportunity to establish both businesses and to sell Korean goods. This is a great opportunity for the Korean economy and one that is not controlled entirely by China. That's important. The Southeast Asian countries are anxious to get Korean investment. They're anxious to do business with Korea. They see Korea as having many similar interests to them. They're just not as far along in development as Korea is. So in many ways, this is a great opportunity for Korea as a country. And it makes it not quite as dependent on China if it can build more economic relations with other countries that aren't as anxious to dominate the Korean peninsula.
And staying with that, Dr. President Yoon has also pledged to boost South Korea's role in the international arena. What areas then, aside from security and trade, do you recommend?
So I think the important element that President Yoon has pledged even before the election was that South Korea is ready and should to play a role that can maintain and develop the current liberal international order. So to keep and maintain the international order, it's not only about economically developed countries, but also many developing countries needs to understand that what international order is beneficial for them. So for South Korea, it's not only in the Korean peninsula, but regionally and globally. South Korea needs to play a role that can sustain the liberal international order. So I think that those countries which are less privileged in terms of like finance and economic area, South Korea can play a lot of roles because many countries have a trust in South Korea's sincere purpose of providing them with the support. So I believe that South Korea under the Yoon administration is going to expand its provision of the support to the countries that's in need of those supplies.
Right. And Dr. Burnett, speaking with Bill Gates yesterday, that would be Tuesday here in South Korea, President Yoon shared his commitment to health justice. Would you say that ensuring global health is another area, perhaps, in which South Korea may play a pivotal role?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have to remember we have been thoroughly focused on the COVID pandemic, which keeps coming and going as different variants occur. But monkeypox has now reminded us that there are other diseases out there that need to be addressed. And with all of these diseases, but especially with COVID and the variants, getting it under control globally is critical because variants don't necessarily occur in one country or another. They can occur anywhere in the world. And so it's important that we have vaccines with all of the countries, that people can get vaccinated to control the illness like COVID, but also like monkeypox. And Korea has an incredibly great health system. Korea can provide vaccines. Korea can provide other medical capabilities to help the world in cooperation with the United States and other allies throughout the world. So this is a cooperative endeavor. Korea's got great capabilities. They ought to be used.
Right. And talking about Korea's capabilities, there was a question by one of the members of the foreign press to President Yoon about the possibility of nuclear weapons here in South Korea. Now, President Yoon spoke about his commitment to the non-proliferation treaty. This is with regard, of course, concerns posed by North Korea. What are your thoughts?
So President Yoon has reiterated his position since he enters the politics that South Korea is not going to arm itself with nuclear weapons or ask United States to redeploy its tactical nuclear weapons back to South Korea. Because South Korea is keeping the international norms about the nuclear weapons, and also it doesn't help South Korea to pursue denuclearization of North Korea. So I believe that his position will remain same, and he pointed out that there are a lot of different ways that South Korea can strengthen its extended deterrence with the United States.
Right, he did. All right, Doctor, thank you so much for taking my impromptu question as well. And Dr. Burnett, over in the US, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts as well.
Thank you.
Right, and on that note, we end the first half of the Daily Report. We'll return with the second half in a few minutes. Stay with us.
Arirang, what matters?
Welcome back. Health authorities here have announced 180,803 new COVID-19 infections on this Wednesday. The latest daily tally is the highest since April 13th. Also, there have been 42 additional losses of lives over the past 24 hours, raising the country's death toll to 25,752 since the start of the pandemic. The fatality rate itself stands at 0.12%. Authorities believe the daily tally will peak at around 200,000 this month. Also, the local front President Yoon Suk-yeol met with Bill Gates on Tuesday here in Seoul to reaffirm commitment to global well-being. Gates, for his part, called on South Korea to lead efforts to ensure health protection beyond the current pandemic. Our political correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has more.
President Yoon Suk-yeol and Microsoft's co-founder Bill Gates on Tuesday sat down to discuss ways to strengthen ties between the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and South Korea. After saying how glad they both were to see each other in person following phone talks in June, Yoon said he hopes the COVID-19 vaccine developed by South Korea's SK Bioscience could be readily used to protect people in developing countries. To that, Gates talked about how excellent a partner SK has been in making the country's very first COVID-19 vaccine and added he expects further cooperation with the country.
저도 대한민국 정부를 대표해서 우리나라가 수준 높은 바이오 헬스 기술을 계속 구축해 나가면서 세계 시민의 건강 증진에 기여할 수 있도록 우리 게이츠 이사장님의 재단과도 아주 내실 있는 이런 협력 관계를 갖고 싶습니다.
And so the growing partnership with South Korea, both as you grow your aid budget in a generous way, but also as you're developing through the universities and the nonprofits and the companies here, great new capabilities. It's a strong match with the goals of the Gates Foundation.
Meanwhile, earlier on the same day, Gates visited South Korea's National Assembly, his first visit there in 9 years. There, he urged Seoul to take an active role in enhancing global health security after holding talks with Speaker Kim Jin-pyo for around 40 minutes. He complimented South Korea's work of transforming a post-war economy into a powerhouse in a very short time, now giving aid to other countries for them to go on the same journey of progress. While calling it fantastic how South Korea is taking part in implementing multilateral global health initiatives, such as its commitment in COVAX, Gates said the country is ready to be a leader in improving global health.
Korea is poised to be a leader in this work. Not only as you raise your aid generosity to match being one of the top 10 in the world, you also have particular strengths. Incredible vaccine manufacturing, incredible diagnostic manufacturing, R&D capabilities, diagnostic capabilities. In fact,
the billionaire philanthropist urged South Korea not only to play an active role in tackling COVID-19, but also to work with the foundation to eradicate other health issues faced by people around the world. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Yoon administration will supply the market with some 2.7 million homes by the year 2027. The plan stands in line with the pledge made by the president on his campaign trail. Our finance ministry correspondent Om Ji-young reports.
The Yoon Suk-yeol administration's first package of measures to address housing supply crisis focuses on keeping one of the key pledges made by President Yoon. Over a period of 5 years starting next January, the government plans to supply around 2.7 million homes nationwide. Around 1.6 million houses will be supplied in the capital region, with 500,000 in Seoul. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho, during a ministerial meeting on the property market Tuesday, said houses will be supplied in high-demand areas like Seoul and its surrounding regions.
First, there will be reforms to allow more opportunities for people to buy houses in highly preferred regions. There will also be gradual reforms to unreasonable systems of reconstruction and redevelopment to supply more homes in urban areas.
By easing regulations, roughly 520,000 houses will be supplied by reconstructing old buildings and redeveloping rundown areas. And some 1.3 million houses will be supplied through private-led projects, which will allow buildings to have a floor area ratio up to 500%. This will allow developers to construct taller buildings with more housing units. The government plans to build so-called compact cities, which are within 1 kilometer from subway or railway stations. The nation's land minister said it's important to supply quality houses in order to stabilize the runaway property market.
The plan not only goes beyond providing a hands-on housing supply plan, but also encompasses improving housing quality and living environment and housing welfare for socially vulnerable people.
He added that the ministry will work to resolve housing problems prone to disasters, as several people living in semi-underground houses died due to the recent heavy rain in the country. The government plans to buy those units and reconstruct them or turn them into community facilities. Also, to get more people on the property ladder, the government will provide some 500,000 new homes to newlyweds, young adults, and first-time buyers at levels below 70% of the market price. Those eligible will be able to get a long-term mortgage of up to 40 years at low interest rates. The government plans to come up with a more comprehensive housing policy for young adults in September, with a revision to the law expected to be made within the first half of next year. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Corporate Korea performed better in the first half of 2022 than they did during the same period last year, according to local corporate tracker CEO Score. Among the top 500 firms, 337 businesses that shared their reports saw a 28% surge in sales. Overall sales in 19 out of 20 industries posted gains, with the petrochemical industry noting a jump of over 44% on average. The IT industry followed suit with over 19%, and the automobile and parts industry with around 15%. Also, during the first 6 months of this year, Samsung Electronics saw its share of the global smartphone market expand. The company says its global market share stood at 22.6%, up 2.5 percentage points on year. It's the 11th year in a row that Samsung Electronics has ranked first in findings for the first half. The company is also poised to unveil low-end phones in response to the slowing smartphone market worldwide. Meanwhile, its market share of DRAM chips edged up to 43.5%, and it accounted for more than half of the market for smartphone panels. But its performance in the TV sector retreated amid geopolitical risks and the unstable global supply chain. In the U.S., just weeks before the midterm elections there, President Joe Biden has signed into law a bill that seeks to combat climate change, cut healthcare costs, and raise corporate taxes. Our Kim Hyo-sun has details.
President Joe Biden has signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, an ambitious measure that aims to dampen inflation, combat climate change, and lower the price of prescription drugs. Speaking during the bill signing ceremony at the White House on Tuesday, Biden praised the legislation as one of the most significant measures in America's history.
With this law, the American people won and the special interests lost.
Referring to the law, he explained that this is proof that the soul of America is vibrant and the future of the country is bright. Ahead of the signing, the White House emphasized the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, saying between 5 and 7 million Americans could see their prescription drug costs drop. It also explained the bill would contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 1 billion metric tons in 2030. Moreover, local media outlets say that with the signing of the bill, electric vehicles that are assembled outside of North America will no longer qualify for the conventional EV tax credit. This move would have an effect on South Korean car manufacturers like Hyundai and Kia, as vehicles assembled in South Korea will no longer qualify for the $7,500 worth of tax credit for electric vehicles. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres meets with the Ukrainian and Turkish presidents in western Ukraine on Thursday to address Russia's invasion. The trilateral meeting reportedly comes at the invitation of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And on the agenda is also the situation at a Russian-controlled nuclear power plant, which has been hit by shelling. On Friday, the three leaders will visit the Black Sea port of Odessa, where grain exports have resumed under a UN-brokered agreement. Late last month, Russia and Ukraine sealed a deal with the UN and Ankara to resume grain shipments in an attempt to alleviate a global food crisis. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says that any nuclear collaboration between North Korea and Iran is concerning, calling the two countries the most acute proliferation threats. Earlier on Tuesday, Price also noted that the two countries have a history of violating international norms, as North Korea has long been suspected of exporting its nuclear weapons and related technology to countries like Iran. Price stressed that any cooperation between countries that have flagrantly violated UN security resolutions is of concern. On a light note, a recent vegan festival here in Seoul sought to please palates with a new plant-based milk alternative that promises better taste and texture. Here's Cho Sung-min.
A vegan festival recently held in central Seoul showcased an array of new plant-based food items. The most popular products were plant-based meat items.
I thought that meat alternatives would be dry and have crumbly textures, but they're similar in texture and are as juicy as real meat.
South Korea's plant-based meat market has continued to expand over growing interest and demand. While most current meat substitutes are made from a mixture of soybean and flour, this new kind doesn't contain any flour at all. The maker of the new product says it got rid of it to take out the gluten. And the binder, which helps the patty stay in one shape, is made from plant-based sources only, which includes sunflower seed oil and beetroot.
When eating it, you'll think, it tastes just like meat. And second, realize that the new ingredients offer better nutritional value.
The company has recently built new infrastructures to expand its production and R&D. In addition to the growing interest in the sector, a public official with expertise in this field explains that plant-based meat will inevitably become more popular.
The demand for sustainable foods is growing with the rise of climate change and food shortage crisis. We will actively support and foster startups that develop such products.
South Korea is likely to see a shift in perception of plant-based meats from a niche product only for a group of people with special interests to something closer to the norm that will be consumed by the majority of people. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
Efforts to save an endangered species of flowering plants native to South Korea have been bearing fruit over in the southern resort island of Jeju. Our Chung Won-jo has more on the yellow hibiscus known as hwanggeun here in the country.
Ojori Port in Jeju Island, Seongsanub, in the city of Seogwipo, is the largest area in South Korea for the hardy yellow hibiscus flower. Also known as hwanggeun, these yellow flowers can be seen along Jeju's trails. It's the only native species among the hibiscus genus in South Korea and is classified as a second-grade endangered plant. The petals are elegant and look like rolled-up sheets of traditional Korean paper, hanji. The flower is also nicknamed Treasure Pocket because the golden stamen in the center is said to look like treasure.
The flowers are so beautiful to look at while walking when they bloom in June and July. It would be nice for more tourists to come and visit here.
Hwanggeun is a halophyte, or salt-tolerant plant that grows in soil or waters with high salinity and was common in warm climates such as Jeju Island and Jeollanam-do Province. But in 1988, it was listed as an endangered species following reckless coastal development and road construction which destroyed the flower's natural habitat. That's when the public and private sectors united and set out to save the hwanggeun. In 2003, a private organization started restoration work by planting them along roads and trails. Since 2013, the National Institute of Biological Resources has carried out large-scale transplantation work, taking the flowers from Jeollanam-do Province to Jeju's coastal areas, Songaksan Mountain, and the island's Olle Trail. As a result, the hwanggeon is thriving genetically. So much that the government is now planning to remove it from the endangered species list in the near future.
The artificially restored group has a similar blooming rate as the natural group. These results were submitted to be reviewed for the Ministry of Environment's revision of the endangered wildlife list this year.
Hwanggeon is becoming another attraction for tourists visiting Jeju Island. 정은주, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Kenya, the country is seeing fallout in the wake of its controversial presidential election. Just hours after sitting Vice President William Ruto was declared Kenya's fifth president-elect, his rival Raila Odinga on Tuesday called for the result to be nullified, saying he will look into, quote, all legal options. This comes after a neck-and-neck presidential race where Ruto pulled ahead with 50.5% of the vote. 4 of 7 senior election officials, including the Election Commission's deputy chairperson, had already disowned Monday's election results, citing a lack of transparency. However, an independent observer group said it sent over 5,000 watchers across 290 constituencies nationwide and that election results lined up with their own count. Meanwhile, police confirmed the discovery of an election official's body late on Monday amid reports of threats against electoral officers. Another Russian military facility on the Crimean Peninsula has been hit with a series of blasts. Several large explosions were seen at an ammunition depot in the village of Maiskoye on Tuesday. 2 people were injured with no deaths reported. Russia's defense ministry has pointed to sabotage as the cause of the explosions. It marks the second set of explosions in a week to hit the Russia-controlled region. Last Tuesday, blasts at an airbase in Novofedorivka damaged at least 8 aircraft and surrounding structures. While Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for the latest incident, a Ukrainian presidential advisor said that a power substation near the ammunitions depot was also damaged by the explosions. Australian rugby player Elia Green is the first Olympian to transition from female to male. Green officially made the announcement on Tuesday while speaking through video at Ottawa's Transphobia and Homophobia in Sport Summit. The summit was held around the gay and inclusive biennial Bingham Cup, often referred to as rugby's Gay World Cup. Green is a former member of Australia's women's rugby sevens team, which took gold at the 2016 Rio de Janeiro Olympics. The 29-year-old made the transition after retiring from sport and had gender-reaffirming surgery in November 2021. In the announcement, Green also criticized the October 2020 decision by World Rugby to ban transgender women from participating in women's rugby events. The Academy Awards have issued a formal apology to an actress 50 years after she was booed off stage. Native American activist Sasheen Littlefeather received the letter of apology from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which oversees the Oscars. Littlefeather appeared on stage at the 1973 Academy Awards ceremony on behalf of actor Marlon Brando, who had refused to accept his Best Actor award. Brando cited his support of Native American rights as his reason, referring to Native American activists protesting government inaction on treaties at the time. Littlefeather made a speech denouncing the treatment of American Indians by the film industry, but guests at the award show booed her off stage and made rude gestures. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Wednesday afternoon. Now the sun is breaking through the clouds in Seoul. The capital is reaching 30 degrees Celsius, but you might feel even hotter due to the high humidity. And meanwhile, the south coast and Jeju Island are still under the effect of a rain system. While Jeju Island and parts of Gangwon-do province are with a heavy rain alert, so those regions are predicted to get up to 120 millimeters of heavy rain. And you also need an umbrella if you're in the capital region, as scattered showers are expected in most inland regions up to 60 millimeters, possibly with lightning or gales. And the central regions where there is snow major in the forecast will be hot and muggy, reaching 30 degrees in Daejeon, Chuncheon, and Daegu. And the rain will taper off tomorrow, but another round of rain will start from Friday, and that rain will be nationwide. The ground has been already weakened by heavy downpours, so take extra precautions to avoid landslides or flooding. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
That brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. Do stay tuned to Arirang News for more of the day's headlines. Thank you for now.